Did on another computer, so I'll see when it turns on.
The record, it does come up and say recording,
There
Stephen?
it is, yeah.
Yep.
I need to mute that.
Great. Well, we've got 5 minutes. We'll let people stream in here.
So I should turn off my video until I start?
Yeah, might as well.
Leslie, could you hit record too?
I think it is recording.
It is recording. I have a button that says pause, stop
okay.
recording.
All right, great. No, good. Okay.
Yep.
I can't see that from what I'm looking. Okay.
Yeah, I have nothing new on chat, Stephen. No new settings.
Leslie, do you mind sharing your screen?
Yep.
Is that cool? Not right now, but just so that I can talk through the slides, or the first slide anyway. Yeah. That way we don't have to switch back and forth.
Yep. I can put this. Ooh, what happened there?
Leslie, could you talk?
Yes. Hello.
Just make sure I get the audio connected right here.
All right. Patrick, your photo is the new logo. I don't
Yeah.
think you mean it to be that. I think you actually want to show yourself.
No? Yeah, I didn't set it.
Okay.
I don't know how that changed, but
yeah,
we'll work on that.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Patrick, could you talk?
Yeah, I'm right here. You hear me okay?
I do hear you, but my recording is not hearing you.
Okay.
Figure that out.
All right.
Okay.
I'm going to share screen and just put the first screen up there, Patrick, just so that's what everybody's seeing.
Great. There we go.
Oops, are you seeing?
Yeah, I can see your presentation. You just have to present now. Go full screen.
There we go. Now
there
you
go.
get it. Okay. Whoops.
Some people streaming in. We'll wait a couple minutes like we usually do, just to get everybody in. Welcome everyone who's here so far.
Yep.
One thing that's nice to see is just like totally new names every webinar.
Sure.
Got a quick question. Is there any way to turn transcriptions on for captioning or captioning? I don't know if, does Zoom support that?
It does.
Stephen?
We are not connected to that service.
Okay. Is that like an upgrade or something, or just a thing we need to turn on?
Third party, it's a third party service.
Okay. Does that happen on YouTube when these go up on YouTube? Do they have auto captioning?
Not sure.
Okay, it's a good question. We'll look into it. Cool. Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, it's noon. We're going to wait a couple more minutes for everyone to get settled, and then we'll get started. So let's say 12:02. You got a couple minutes to kind of get settled here, and we'll get going. I wonder if we should start the event at 11:55 next time, just so that we can start on the hour. Yeah, just for the people who are joining, there was a question about captioning and whether we will offer that for the videos, for the recordings, and we're going to take a look at that and see what we can do, because that's a good question. So thank you for the info. All right, let's do this. Welcome everybody. My name is Patrick Corbett, and I'm one of the volunteers here at Design for Drupal. And this is one of our ongoing monthly webinars for Design for Drupal in lieu of our annual event that typically takes place in June and July timeframe. And it's our 12th anniversary, soon to be our 13th in 2021. And just a heads up, we're starting to go through the process of updating our branding to reflect the new year, but that'll kind of happen slowly as we reach our typical starting point, which is in the June-July timeframe. So welcome everybody, thanks for coming. Take a deep breath, we made it to 2021. And thank you for spending some time with us today. We have a really great speaker today. I'm really interested to hear what she has to say. So Leslie will take us through some reminders and some new events coming up outside of the Design for Drupal realm, and then we'll get started. Take it away, Leslie.
Thank you, Patrick. Welcome everybody to the Design for Drupal Boston January 2021 webinar. Today's topic is Design for Developers with Ruth Leopold, and we're going to get to that in 1 minute after we go through some of the slides up front. So we want to again thank Christina Chumulis from Lullabots, who did the keynote back in June, which seems like such a long time ago. But thank you, Christina. That was very good. We have a link to her recording for anybody that may have missed it up on the designfordrupal.org website. That was on the Claro admin theme that's new in Drupal 8. During the June event, we had a 24-hour global contribution day. You can still continue to contribute to anything in Drupal, but we specifically were looking at Claro, which was the admin theme. You could go to the Slack channel admin-UI if you want to contribute to that. The Olivero theme, Mike Herschel gave a webinar a few months ago. You can go to the hashtag D9-theme if you want to participate in the Olivero. Everybody's obviously welcome to contribute, whether you're a front end, a marketing, design, code, testing, anything, accessibility. Feel free to help contribute. And we'll talk about contributing in a minute as well. Upcoming webinar series, we meet Wednesdays, usually the second Wednesdays of the month at 12 o'clock Eastern. We are looking for speakers for 2021. So if you know of anybody or you have any topics you'd like to, to have a speaker on, please reach out and let us know. The recordings for every month's webinars are on the website, design4drupal.org. So you can catch up on any webinars you may have missed. We've had a lot of great speakers since July. We had our first webinar. So go back and look at those if you haven't already. As Patrick said, we are planning for Design for Drupal Boston 2021. There's a screenshot there of our new design. Also, we're looking for help planning the event. So if you'd like to be part of the organizing team, it can be, as little as, doing a little marketing or social media for us, or maybe you want to work on the website. So reach out to us if you're interested in helping us out for 2021. In terms of community events, the next big community event coming up is DrupalCon North America. That was going to be in Boston, and that's where we our area. That's going to be in April. The 12th to the 16th is going to be the session days, and the early bird registration is now open. It's $195 until February 3rd. That includes everything for that time period, the 12th to the 16th, including all the summits, higher ed and all GovCon and all those different summits, includes those. And it includes everything for Drupal Fest, which is going to be a month-long set of activities. And we'll follow up with more on that. The Drupal Association will as things roll out. The call for content is open now until February 14th for DrupalCon. So if you have a great session, please submit it. In terms of contributions, there is a global contribution weekend the end of this month on January 29th to 31st. So again, anybody is welcome to join that. Just go online and look for Drupal Global Contribution Weekend, and you'll find links to all the activities happening. Some of the other camps that are coming up, I'll just mention a few. This certainly isn't an exhaustive list, but Florida Drupal Camp is February 18th to 21st. Submissions are open and registration's open. Nerd Summit is March 10th to 12th. And everything so far that I've been speaking of is virtual, including DrupalCon. Midcamp, March 24th to 27th. They're still working, the organizing team, on exactly what they're going to have for Midcamp this year. They're trying to do something new rather than just sessions. And there is, for those event organizers that might be on the call, there's a Drupal event code of conduct training that's happening. It happens once a month. It's a really good training. I have taken it. They recommend that at least one organizer of all Drupal events take that training. So you can find that online as well. And the community working group from the Drupal Association is running that, in charge of setting up that training. It is done by a third-party company. And then again, if you're not a member of the Drupal Association, certainly help us out by joining that. There is a page on drupal.org/community/events. You'll see all the events, including the ones I just mentioned. Everything upcoming is listed on that page. The code of conduct I mentioned, this is a virtual event. The code of conduct, the Drupal code of conduct, is in effect for all Drupal events, whether they're virtual or not. We expect everybody to, respect everybody. If there's any issues, you can reach out to Patrick or myself. We don't anticipate any, but if there are, please reach out to us. We want to quickly thank our digital sponsors, Redfin Solutions, Lullabot, McPhee Design, American Graphics Institute, Dev Collaborative, Oomph, Isavera, Talking Drupal, 108 Degrees, and Oddbird. So thank you all for helping us put on this webinar series throughout the year. On social media, if you want to tweet about this, this event, you can use the hashtag d4d, the number 4D Boston. And just remember, this is a tough year for everybody, so just be kind to everybody you interact with. And I did an update, enjoy the holiday season. Well, let's just say 2020 this is the 13th month of 2020. We're gonna get over all this, so enjoy, everybody do your best. We're going to use the Q&A feature rather than chat, so if you have questions as we go, please use the Q&A feature. And that's about it. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it back to Patrick, who is going to introduce our speaker for today's webinar.
Thanks, Leslie. Today our speaker is Ruth Leopold, and she is a graduate of the University of Maine's New Media program. And she works with me here at Redfin Solutions, and she has had a few different roles at our company, but the biggest ones has been that she's helped with design and front-end development and some back-end development. And so she bridges this unique bridge between design and development. And she has a lot of great techniques that she's developed over the years to help designers and developers work better together. And I'm really excited to kind of hear what she has to share with us today. So Ruth, welcome and take it away.
Thanks, Patrick. So I'll just share my screen. All right, you seeing it okay?
Looks good.
All right. Well, again, thanks, Patrick and Leslie. I'm Ruth Leopold. I'm a designer and front-end developer at Redfin. And a lot of my, or one of the things, like Patrick said, that I do is I will work with designers and developers and be kind of that bridge so that we have some better communication, a little bit more. I act as a little bit of a translator between those worlds sometimes. So that's kind of what I want to help you become a little bit more in this presentation. So my my overall idea that I want to share is that design is not a totally different world than development. You might think of designers as creatives, artists, but just like developers, there's a set of rules, set of logic and patterns that we follow. There is also some psychology that goes into it. So it's kind of like we're coding for the brain with all of these design rules and elements. So I just want to bring you through some of that, help you to understand a little bit of how you can apply some of this logic, even codify some of these design decisions to understand better how that bridge can be that gap can be bridged, and how we can just work better together by creating some empathy between us. So one example to start you off with, just to kind of give you an idea of what design can do to kind of translate or transform something using just the way we think. This guy, Ron Siegel, his YouTube channel is Flux, is someone that I follow and learn a lot from. And one of the things that he does is he will take a website that's a little bit of a mess, and he'll use all of these patterns and kind of laws of design to help transform it. So you can see on this site, it's a little bit overwhelming. You have a ton of options of things you can do. You don't necessarily understand what you're looking at yet. So he takes it and he transforms it into something that is taking away all of this cognitive power that you might be putting in looking at this, trying to understand it. And he simplifies it, giving you the point, giving you a point of action with a button, making sure you know where you are on the site and really what's happening. So all of these design rules that we go through are going to help you to do something like transform this into this. And before I go into that, I just want to kind of talk about how with great power comes great responsibility. We're going to learn a little bit of how the brain works, but we also want to be wary of not manipulating people and really, like we always do in the Drupal community, have a positive impact on what we're creating. So dark patterns is just something to be aware of. This site, I think it's like darkpatterns.com, but you can just look up dark patterns, gives you some of these examples of things that can be designed that really trick the user into doing something that they don't necessarily want to do. So Roach Motel is kind of a funny one. You get into a situation very easily, but then it's hard to get out of, like a subscription. Privacy Zuckering is kind of another funny but can be dark one about tricking people into publicly sharing their information. And then on a related note, I think we all just need to be wary of how any of our designs that we put out there, or we allow to kind of be built, any of the algorithms that we code, we need to be mindful of the impact that they can have on our society at large, because all of these things have a lot of power. And so it's always important to step back and recognize the larger impact on the world. And on a slightly lighter note, but still important, unlike these parrots, we're not all the same. Our brains don't all work the same. So accessibility is a big thing that we will talk about in the development world, in Drupal, in design. And it's just the, I think, really healthy brain exercise of recognizing that not everyone's experience is the same as ours. So recognizing that people will be using screen readers on our site. People will be on there that don't have English as a native language. People have different levels of anxiety. And so all of these things, all of these design rules and practices can help us to just make a world that's a little bit more accessible to people, establish trust in the things that we're creating, and just have a positive impact. So I'm going to start with just the basic elements of design. And again, design is kind of psychological. We're going to be thinking about how the brain works, but a lot of it is numbers, it's math, and can be codified in different ways, especially as we'll see with color. So color is a really big first element of design. So all the colors that we see have some kind of connotation to us, some kind of power. So red is often used in a call to action because it makes us want to act in some way. Blue is something that's more calming. And so if you're choosing a color for a design, for a presentation, whatever you're creating, you want to look a little bit into what are you trying to convey with what you're doing and what color aligns to that. So this is going to be my first live demo. So there are different components to what makes up a color. So we're probably all familiar with hex. It's just a series of numbers and letters that make a certain color. So FFF is white, and then we get all these kind of random letters and numbers. They're not actually random, but too much to explain right now. On the other hand, there are other ways that we can show these colors or codify these colors. So red, green, blue, RGBA, and A is just opacity. This is color in terms of light rather than pigment, if you're familiar with that. So all these go from 0 to 255. So the less red you have, the less red is going to be added to the page. The more red is going to be added to the page. So red and blue make kind of a magenta. Red and green actually make like a yellow. if you get rid of the blue. So that's just how color in the RGB way is adds up. You can also look at it as HSLA, which is hue, saturation, and lightness. Hue is really just kind of where on this bar is blue, green, of going through all these colors. Saturation, on the other hand, is kind of how saturated, how bright that is. So if we go down, we get a lot more gray than if we go up. And lightness, on the other hand, is how much light you have. So if you go down, it gets to be more black. So those are our basics of color. I'm going to show a couple other demonstrations, but let's get back to presenting this. So we have not only the colors, but color schemes. So there are certain ways that our brain likes to see color. So monochromatic is one of those where we're using the same color, but we're using different shades of it, like lighter green and darker green. Complementary is when you go across the color wheel. Triadic is you're doing kind of a triangle. And Natalia Shelburne, who has become a big role model for me as I've done some of the research for this, was previously a designer, is now a developer, I believe at the New York Times. And she has, in her understanding of how design works, she's codified some of these things. So I'm going to show you a little bit of how she's done that. And this is something that you could look a little bit more into on your own. I'll just do a quick view of how it works. So essentially you pick a call to action color, you get started, and then she goes through and explains. She has the color, but then she generates a complementary color and applies all of these different design rules really in code until you get to what could actually be a color scheme for your site. And then when you're choosing a color palette, there are also many tools that you can use to generate a color palette. And I wanted to show you 3 that are helpful that you might use for different cases. So if I can move this Zoom thing that you're probably not seeing. So this is a good example of when you have just one color. So let's say you get a logo and you have one specific color. Let's say it's this kind of blue purple, and then you want some colors to match that. So hit generate, and this has just kind of calculated all of these different color schemes that match that color. This is a different one that I use relatively often because you can actually put in multiple colors. So you can kind of generate random color schemes by hitting a space bar. And then you can also add your own, but let's say I want kind of a pink purple, but I need some different colors. I can lock those and then have the rest auto generate until I find something that I like. And then the last one, I'm sure there are tons of these. I just picked this one. Just gives you a list of different color schemes that you can pick from. It gives you the hex color. Going back, actually, one thing I wanted to mention with this one that's great is that you can simulate different kinds of color blindness, because it's not just black and white, but there are different kinds of color blindness that somebody might have. So you can simulate that, see what it'll actually look like. And you can also adjust the palette, and you can use some of these things that I talked about, like changing the hue, the saturation, the brightness, and then temperature is another one, which is just kind of the amount of warmth or coolness that a color scheme has. All right, I'll present this again. Pull out my notes, sorry. All right, so the next big thing is font or type. And I'm not going to go super into compose, but just designers will talk about if they're going deep into type. So X height is one of the ones that I will think about most frequently, because sometimes a shorter X height becomes a little bit more of a friendly font. And the main types of font that you might see are serif. And serif, you can just see it has those little pointy things at the ends. So any font that has any of those little decorative edges, that's a serif font. Sans serif just means without serif. So you can see that those end a little bit more straight. It doesn't have those decorative edges. And sans serif is a really great font for body text. So when you have a long paragraph, they say that sans serif is usually the easiest to read on the web. Script is another one. If I generally would not recommend using script, just as somebody who's more accessibility focused. I know my younger brother, who's 22, cannot read script at all. And anyone who doesn't have English as a native language, I would imagine, has a harder time reading script. So usually I would say leave script to wedding invitations and your signature, and that's pretty much it. And then a display font is a decorative font that you might see used in a heading. You don't want display font as your body text, because it's going to be just super irritating to read a large amount of that at a small size, but it can, when used in a couple words on a heading, it can bring some interest to the page. So a common thing is that you'll see a display font as headings and sans serif as the actual body text. And so some of the other elements of design besides color and type / fonts are the lines, the thickness, the color, if they're dotted, shapes. Sometimes you can think about the sharpness of a shape, if it's a true square or if the edges are rounded. Imagery, so that'll be photographs or illustrations. Iconography, what the icons on your site look like, if they're bold and solid or if they're more aligned. And then animation is another kind of added one that is great if you can keep some consistency with it. And so all of these elements of design add up to create a cohesive design that just works together and has some consistency for the user. So this site is one that I'll bring up a few times just because it was one that I found that interested me. And you can see in here some of these elements of design. I'm going to pull this up live. So you can see that it has this font that's used over and over again, all kind of the same size, but in different ways. The letters, the characters are a little bit spaced out. It's all caps. And you have that consistently in different places on the site. You also have these sharp edges. You have this consistent line width. You have pretty consistent imagery. And then even the animation, which I think is cool, is pretty consistent, has a pretty consistent speed and kind of feel to it. All right, so I'm sorry, Leslie is a little bit of a bad word. I didn't make it up. But the CRAP principles of design, this is one way that the kind of logic that I talked about previously comes into play, where we're not making any decisions, design decisions arbitrarily, but everything has some purpose. So that stands for contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. And I'm going to talk about each one of these. So contrast. Contrast, pretty obviously, is two things looking different. So contrast gives you something to look at. So you look at this and it goes to the one that's different in a design. So Google, this homepage of Google is a good example of this. It has a contrast between the white space and just kind of the lighter elements and its actual logo. Its logo is colorful. It's the only colorful thing on this page. So you come to this page, immediately your eye goes to the logo, you identify it, you have this association with Google, and then your eye drops down to your point of action, which is to actually search. None of the other things on this page are really calling out to you with contrast. So you have a very specific thing that you know you're supposed to do on this page. If one day Google decided nobody uses this I'm feeling lucky button and nobody knows what it is, I don't know what it is, despite having made this slide, they might give some contrast to this button. And immediately your eye goes to I'm feeling lucky, and you might think, I've never clicked that, I wonder what that is. And so that contrast again gives that focal point. Bing, on the other hand, has a lot more going on. You definitely have contrast between kind of the little bit of chaos going on around it and the search box, which is pretty simple and white. But your eye doesn't necessarily go right to that or stay on that, because you have this image behind it, and you might be kind of wondering what's happening in this image, or can I go to this place? And then you have below that, you have all these points of action of things that you might be interested in. So maybe Bing has some strategy in that, but compared to Google, definitely does not have as much of a focal point on this page guiding toward a specific action. Contrast is something that you definitely want to think about with hierarchy on a page, with headings in particular. So if you know your HTML, you know that you have your page title, which is an H1, and then under that, you should have any H2s, and then within an H2 section, you might have H3s or heading 3s. And so a page like this should convey that a heading 3 is hierarchically under a heading 2. So this page doesn't do a great job of that. There's some difference between these different titles, but it's not super clear the hierarchy here. In this example, instead, you have very clearly the page title, which is using a different font, a display font. And then the heading 3s are more clearly related to the heading 2 section. Here is another example. There's clearly a difference between the heading on this and the body text, but it kind of blends together into this block. And also, you shouldn't have text that's all caps in a sentence, and also your headings shouldn't be full sentences. But there's a real life example that I put in here. So we can change this to this, where we have a lot more contrast between the body text and the heading. We even have a little bit more contrast with the body text and kind of the white space around it, which makes it a little bit easier to read and digest. And then something that we will often talk about with contrast as we're designing or as we're doing some front-end development is the actual contrast ratio that we have to pass when we have, especially when we have colored text on a colored background, or gray text on a white background a lot of times. And so this contrast ratio that you see here is really measuring the comparative brightness of these two colors. And so there are different things that you have to pass for normal text, which is 16 pixels regular weight, and large text, which can either be defined as 18.66 pixels, so it's essentially 19 pixels bold, or 24 pixels regular. So there are tons of contrast checkers out there. I'm sure there are extensions. You can Google it. This one here is just what I have in my design software Sketch. But all these things can help you to check the contrast on your different elements so that not only can people with vision issues see it, but also if you're outside on a bright sunny day and you need to be able to read something on your screen. There are all sorts of different cases for why contrast is super important for accessibility. So since this is a Drupal conference, I just wanted to come up with a couple Drupal specific instances where that contrast thing can be easily missed. So one of them is the skip to main content link. So Drupal automatically gives you this accessibility thing, which is great. So when the first time you tab onto a page, it gives you a skip to main content link. And that's really useful for someone who is accessing a site just via their keyboard. So you tab onto it, gives you this link. And if you have a dark link color and you happen to have a dark site background, then that contrast is not going to be high enough. So that's just something to be mindful of as you're developing. Another one that I ran into recently was just making sure that even on the admin side, making sure things like your local action tabs still are passing that contrast ratio. So if you're getting a light gray background, you want to make sure that your link still is contrasting enough. So repetition is the second one. Just had contrast, now we're doing repetition, and that is pretty much things doing the same thing. And repetition is how you have some consistency in your design. And it helps familiarize users with the way that information is being presented to them on the site. It also gives some identity in general to the site, like we saw previously with that museum site. So a design library, design system, pattern library, those can be great tools for communicating between design and development and just keeping designs consistent. So some of the things that I pay attention to as a designer and developer are spacing, trying to use consistent spacing between elements. Your designer might have a grid system that they're using that you might want to know about. Also breakpoints. So I try and keep things relatively consistent or as consistent as possible between different phone sizes, between different tablet sizes and desktop sizes. So I try and keep my breakpoints as I can at a pretty consistent point, rather than having a ton of things changing at a ton of different breakpoints. And then component patterns, really all of your design is conveying something. Nothing is arbitrary. So if you have two buttons that are essentially doing the same, have the same function, you're taking action with them, and they look different, that's going to be confusing to the user. Something in their brain's going to say, this looks different. Is this going to do something unexpected? So something with repetition or consistency that you want to do is you want to make sure you're limiting your styles. You don't want to throw a ton of fonts on there, a ton of colors on there. Usually you want to stick to 2 fonts at the most, a heading font and a body font. And if you go on Google Fonts, I think that's what it's called, you can see that they'll pair different fonts for you, which can be a helpful tool. You also want to stick to the 60-30-10 rule, which you probably hear about in a lot of different realms of design, whether it's interior design or graphic design. So the point of that is that you want to stick 60% to your main color, 30% to your secondary color, and 10% to your accent color. You can see a little bit of that on this page where it's mostly white, a good amount of dark gray, and then just a little bit of the accent color of this red-orange. So Instagram has an interesting way of dealing with this. It's 60% these neutral colors like white and light gray. I would say the 30% comes in with whatever images the users are uploading. So that could be any number of colors, but it's about 30% of that. And then 10% they have their accent colors. So there's some light blue on the links. They have their orange pink gradient in some places. And they also have consistent patterns. So for a user, they're going to look the same whether they're in the stories section or if it's identifying a specific image for them. Buttons as well, even if they're doing different things like follow versus something else, they're consistent because they're essentially have the same purpose that they're conveying. This does something. Alignment is a third. Alignment is something I've said multiple times, we don't do things arbitrarily, so everything has a place and a purpose. So alignment is just you're aligning things. Alignment, we often will think about text. So we have typically left aligned text, right aligned text, center aligned, and then justified, which kind of aligns to the left and the right. And you can see on the right aligned and center aligned, you have this jagged left side, which can make it a little bit more difficult to read. So for readability, since we read left to right, left alignment is the best for paragraphs of text. Right alignment, you really only want to do that with a few words or a short line, where it's not going to have that jagged left line that makes it harder to read. I pretty much would never justify text. Maybe another designer would, but since somebody else is putting in the content, and you can see here in this justified text, it just kind of adds random spacing. You just don't know what that's going to look like. And so usually I wouldn't do that with text. And then you also want to avoid centering long paragraphs of text. That's a super common one. Again, you don't want to do that because it makes it harder to read with that jagged left side. And then another thing is just to keep the line length to 50 to 75 characters. This is something to be mindful of as you're kind of between screen sizes that you might get in a design. And this is just, again, for readability. It's harder to read things that are shorter than that or things that are longer than that. So a bad example is Craigslist. You can see both on the left and right. It's harder to scan these center aligned things. And then in the middle section, you have these headings that aren't really aligned to the actual content. A good example, on the other hand, is again this site, which uses all kinds of interesting alignment and gives everything a purpose in here. You have center alignment with these different elements, and actually on the bottom, that group of elements is center aligned. You have center alignment in the horizontal direction. You have a good use of justified alignment, where it's not justifying text, but elements on the page. And all of these add up to giving things a purpose. You could also say that on the top left, the items are left aligned, and on the top right, they're right aligned. So the last one is proximity. So this is just things that are proximal, or things that are near each other, are related. So you can see in this example, these things are grouped in columns, and these ones are grouped in rows. And that's just because of how close they are together. So here's an example of text that's not really proximal to each other, so it doesn't seem as related. Whereas if we adjust it a little bit, we can group these things together, and we can see that this body text is related to this header. So if you're a front-end developer, something you might want to think about as you're coding these initial elements, like your H2 through 6, is adding a little bit more space automatically above than below. So things that are close to each other also convey that they have a certain function that's kind of grouped together. So in the top left of this page, that's the whole menu. On the top right, those are some actions you can take. On the bottom here, you can see that the filter and the map are kind of related to the images that are below it. And so to give you an example, I had to create a really bad design. You can see some Comic Sans in here, which you should never use unless you're a preschool teacher. You can see some center alignment. The contrast in the heading is not super high. It makes it kind of hard to read. And there's just a lot going on here. So I started by just taking some of these elements and limiting them. So I got rid of some of these extra fonts, had a little bit of spacing between the text, got rid of that extra green color. And then for my next step, added some of these other things. And so I left aligned the text. I made the heading white, added some contrast there, grouped things by function. You can see the menu and the shopping cart were together here, but I separated them out here and aligned them to the other things on the screen. So I'm sure I could do a lot more with this, but there's only so much effort you want to put into a fake design. So this is just an example of how you can apply some of these rules to create or to transform something into something that's really legible, readable, less anxiety-provoking. And so, like I said in the beginning, I work with kind of bridging the gap between design and development. I remember actually the first d4d that I went to, there is a birds of a feather session, and it was talking about, should designers learn how to code? And I remember there's some tension in that room because some people are like, developers don't learn how to design. Why should designers learn how to code? And so my point is that both should learn a little bit of both. And sometimes people who can design and code are called unicorns. And don't tell Patrick, but I am not actually a mythical creature. Coding and designing and just understanding more than one thing is for more than kind of magical creatures. It's something that everyone can have some kind of understanding of. And when we do have that understanding, we can actually make the things that we want to focus on better. Designers can make their designs better by understanding how the technology works, and developers can make their code better by understanding why design decisions are being made, and what might be made in the future, so the code can be a little bit more flexible and can grow as design grows and be aligned to that. And so sometimes we'll think of designers and developers as having completely different brains, they're completely different ideas. So this model of the brain, that's kind of a popular science model that's been a little bit inaccurate, people have said, because it's a little bit more nuanced than this. It's not so, we don't only use one side of our brain, but sometimes we can kind of categorize ourselves and really limit our ideas about what we can do by thinking in this way, thinking that developers are people who only are analytical and logical, and designers are just born creative, or intuitive, or artists. And really, I'm assuming you're all developers, or most of you are. I would imagine that you say that you are creative in the work that you do, that you are feeling, that you maybe use some intuition as you're building. And for designers, like I've said, we're using logic, we're being analytical, there's even some math involved. And so if we take away these limiting beliefs about what we can do and how our brains work, really we can have a more well-rounded idea of just how our world of web development works and should move forward. And we again can still focus on the things that interest us while still having a broader understanding of this world. All right, so I finished, I think, just in time. Thank you all for listening. You can get my slides at bit.ly/design4developers. And I just created a Twitter just in case people have questions after this. So you can find me at Ruth Leo on Twitter.
Thanks, Ruth. And I think if I heard correctly, you're suggesting that developers should feel free to start designing for their respective companies.
Pretty much, or at least communicate, have some conversations with their designers and get a little together. But yes, especially if you're making slideshows, please align your things and don't use a ton of colors.
Fair enough. We've got some questions, and we also have somebody who's raising their hand, and I think they asked the question too. So I'm just going to go through and throw this out to you. So the first question comes from Azim, and they're wondering, what is the difference between typography, typeface, and font?
It's a good question that I probably would be able to answer better by Googling. But if I am correct in my understanding, it's all relatively synonymous. There are specific things that we will talk about. Like I think a font is a particular instance of a typeface or font face that has a certain weight and a certain size. I may not be completely accurate on that, but it's all kind of in the same realm of things. So we're probably talking about the same things when we use any of these words.
All right, and the next question, are there any tools or Chrome extensions or maybe Firefox extensions, et cetera, that you might recommend that assist with color contrast for accessibility issues?
I don't have any that I use in dev tools or in extensions. I'm sure there are plenty that you could get by Googling. I mostly am checking that in Sketch, so I don't have specific advice for that, but I think it should be, there's a lot out there because it's something that people care about.
Yeah, I think there's maybe a Wave plugin, and I know Firefox has some built-in stuff too. You might want to check out.
Yeah, actually, when you're in your like Chrome DevTools or Firefox DevTools, and you're clicking on the color, sometimes it actually gives you the color contrast, and you'll see kind of a line over that color box that will show you where you need to be to pass that.
And last question I have right now, I believe, is what kind from Chris? What kinds of things do you look for when you're trying to build a typography set? Like, what do you need to pair a heading font with a body font?
That's a good question. That was something that I cut. Was the I had the psychology of design. There's also a psychology behind font. And so there are different fonts that give you a different feel. I mentioned briefly that X height will, a shorter X height sometimes gives you a friendlier feel to your font. And then when I'm pairing it, a lot of times I will go and look at Google Fonts, or I'll Google it. But also matching things like X height can be something that is helpful if you have something like this font that you're seeing actually that has kind of a the characters are a little bit broader rather than taller. Having something that matches that in a body font as well. And a lot of times I'll use the same font and I'll just use different boldness, and that is a really easy way to match fonts together is if you're using the same font.
Yeah, and that might be one of the differences between designers and developers is the innate ability to just sort of choose things that match versus for developers, being a developer myself, having some rules and things to go by that you shared today are helpful and kind of more in line with how I think developers think. It's like, okay, like I need to find something that is similar height, similar, whereas it seems like designers can just do that.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of learning and experience, but also there's some sense of intuition, because a lot of these design rules are not spelled out for you, but you kind of get an understanding as you get used to using these, and you see the ways that other people are using them.
Well, thank you, Ruth. I don't think we have any other questions. It looks like the Q&A is empty. So thank you everybody for joining. I will remind everyone that we're still looking for speakers for next month. And we don't have any scheduled for the months thereafter. So as we build up to next year's official keynote, I'd like to invite folks to submit ideas or recommendations, or if they personally want to speak, just reach out to us. You can go to the website and send us an email, and we'll get right back to you. Other than that, Leslie, am I forgetting anything?
Nope. I just want to again thank everybody for participating, and we'll see everybody at next month's webinar.
Great. Thanks, everybody. All right.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording.
Nice work, Ruth.